You want to get the right things done for your security program. Sounds simple, but what are the right things for you? What does done mean? And how are you going to get there? Rapid7 realizes more than anyone how hard this can be. While Rapid7's Insight platform offers you industry-leading vulnerability management and detection and response solutions, their focus is on understanding where you are so that they can help you get where you're going. Visit securityweekly.com/Rapid7 to get started. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Learn how to keep your internet safe in our next webcast on August 13th. That's right, Todd Beardsley from Rapid7, Matt Alderman, and myself will be talking about the report released by Rapid7 because they've basically scanned the entire internet and are going to tell us about all of the things they've learned and the trends on whether or not the internet is safer than it was before or not so safe. You just have to tune in to find out. securityweekly.com/webcast or /on-demand to check out our previously recorded webcasts. Neira Jones, ambassador at Emerging Payments and Association, advises organizations on all sizes on payments, FinTech, RegTech, cybercrime, information security regulations, and more. With more than 20 years of experience in financial services and technology, her belief in change through innovation and partnerships. She joins us today to talk about FinTech and some of the things emerging in the financial space. Welcome, Neira, to the show.
Hi, glad to be here.
It's nice to have you. Neira, how did you get your start in information security and working in the financial sector?
So working in the financial sector was an absolute deliberate choice. That's what I wanted to do when I left university and got my master's. So invariably I started working for a bank and I became a programmer. That's how I started my career. So that was a very, very long time ago. And I'm going to show my age now. As a programmer, you know, what I had to deal with every day was COBOL and Fortran and RPG, and Pascal was a very, very cool thing. So that's how long ago that was. So anyway, so I moved on. I stayed in financial services and alternatively worked for banks and for technology companies, such as Oracle, for example. And I ended up being where I am now, which is have been an independent consultant since 2014. So about 6 years now. It seems like yesterday. And moving into information security was really literally by accident when I applied for my last corporate job, which happened to be program director for PCI-DSS. I wanted to move into cards. I didn't know anything about cards before. I was essentially a retail banker. And suddenly there is this thing called PCI-DSS. And the only contact I've ever had with information security in my career was for them to tell me that I couldn't do the things I wanted to do. So I looked up PCI-DSS, and it stood for Payment Card Industry. So far, so good. That's where I wanted to be. Data security standard, not so good. So I went for the interview, nevertheless, because I really wanted to work for the company, and it sounded quite interesting. And I ended up getting the job. And I stayed there for about 5 years, and I was director of payment security and fraud, and the start of my career in security. So it very rapidly moved on from pure card payment security to information security in general, of course, with a very, very good sprinkling of fraud prevention as well as financial services regulation. And this is where I am now.
And it's interesting, Neira. I think, when I put myself in this camp, I was really hard on PCI-DSS, especially in the beginning. And it wasn't until I took this retrospect and went back and looked at how rampant fraud was and how I believe today that PCI-DSS has actually done a pretty good job at helping reduce fraud. Would you agree with that, having worked directly in that space?
I would absolutely agree with that. And I think PCI-DSS gets a hard rap. It's actually a very good set of security control. I think the reason why PCI-DSS gets a hard rap is because the industry in general tends to have lost sight of the intent. When PCI-DSS was created, the intent was to prevent card fraud.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's evolved very, very much from that, and the standard itself has evolved to cater for new technologies, mobile, for example, and so on and so forth. And it has evolved with the modern threats that we are facing, and it is indeed constantly evolving with feedback from the community. But somehow it seems that organizations and the security industry in general have concentrated on compliance. And the idea as an end in itself, whereas compliance is absolutely not an end in itself. It's a means of checking at any given point in time whether the identifier or the known risks rather are there or not there. So I think we should get back to basic really and go back to the intent, which was to prevent fraud. And what is preventing fraud but managing risk?
Yeah.
So essentially managing risk and being pragmatic was the intent of the standard. Somehow along the line it's been lost, and I hope we recover it.
I also think that what helped was credit card companies made changes to the card system, right, with chips and pins and all of that stuff in conjunction with PCI, right? So it did create, different data points, and we shouldn't store this data or that data. But there was also, those advances coupled with PCI, I think, is really what, when I look back in history to the carding scene, almost 20 years ago, I mean, it was really easy to commit credit card fraud, right?
Oh,
I think the bar is much higher today. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So and I think now we've moved on quite a lot since then, and indeed in terms of the chip, obviously in Europe we've had that for a very long time, and in the States the migration has been sort of going on since the end of 2015. So, and it's making things better, but as we experienced, and as indeed you have experienced, as far as fraud is concerned, I always say, when you squeeze it somewhere, it's like a balloon, it actually pops up somewhere else. So the effect that we already observed in Europe when we went through the chip migration is what other geographies that have had more recent migration are experiencing, which is basically the fraud in e-commerce, and essentially what is called card not present is effectively bubbling up as a result. And that is compounded with the fact that we're now going through a pandemic where everything is more digital. So invariably, fraud is going to increase.
So they're going to attack web applications, John, right? Sorry, John. Did I introduce John? I don't think I introduced John. I'm sorry. John Kinsella is here, one of our hosts on Application Security Weekly, and a very good time for John to interject, into the conversation, as web apps are probably one of the biggest targets in terms of e-commerce fraud. I mean, unless there's the physical attack against the card collection, payment devices. The other popular attack vector is, of course, web apps, right?
Well, especially once you start doing card not present, right? It's like you have to have somewhere to be able to both test that the card is valid so that you can sell it, and then actually try and mule some money out of it. Neira, what I'd be interested in thinking about or hearing from you is I don't know if your experience is mostly in Europe or other parts of the world. We had someone on Application Security Weekly this week talking about how different parts of the world treat security and privacy differently. Sort of curious from your point of view, especially around PCI. I mean, PCI in the US, I'm with Paul. Initially, I think it was a bit of a joke, the first version or two, as people both got more serious about it. And then also as the spec became a little more refined and the auditors started paying more attention, I think that's when it started digging in. But curious, what's your thoughts? Have you seen something like that, or has it been more globally even around the world?
In terms of it being not taken seriously, is that the question?
Well, yeah, both from either a consumer point of view or probably more a vendor point of view. Has it got the same level of respect?
Okay, so it invariably, when there is regulation will always get tremendous respect, because essentially its regulation. Now, PCI-DSS, certainly in Europe, is not regulation. It's not law. It's not statute. It is governed by the card schemes for those that belong to, are members of the card networks. So as such, regulation itself will take precedence. What we went through in Europe, obviously since May 2018, is the launch of the General Data Protection Regulation. So, and everybody was preparing for this and getting very, very scared about it. And so that's where the focus was. So suddenly, and I'm sure you've seen that yourself, with CCPA now, suddenly everyone is a GDPR expert, and you saw the people doing PCI security companies suddenly doing GDPR and data protection and data privacy, some better than others, and that's what's happened. So now I think we've calmed down a bit and starting to realize, horses for courses. Data protection is one thing, data security is another thing, and data privacy, again, is a different thing. But what we have to be very, very conscious is in any privacy regulation, what is termed as personal data, for lack of a better term, is something that needs to be protected. Now, the guidelines from the various regulations will differ slightly, so let's not forget that cardholder information is also personal data. So I think it's a case of applying common sense to everything and not treating regulations or standards separately and in silos, but look at the holistic picture for your business and see, well, what is it that I have and what do I need to do with it and how do I need to protect it to ensure that, one, I prevent fraud, and two, I'm on the right side of the law.
GDPR is an interesting one right now from the penalty point of view. There was an article I saw somewhere in the last few months, Paul, that was talking about, GDPR has been out for in effect for I think about a year now. There's been no major penalties. There's been no major penalties that I'm aware of yet. And they were saying initially everyone, as you were saying, was super scared. Yeah. But no. Okay, are the teeth going to show, do you think, or what's going to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. There have been some penalties, and as you know yourself, I mean, to implement regulation actually takes a reasonable amount of time. So we had very, very major data breaches due to MageCard. I'm sure you've heard of them, with British Airways and Ticketmaster, and the proposed fine by the Information Commissioner's Office here in the UK were quite substantial. They have not been levied yet because unfortunately something else happened at the beginning of this year. So we have a pandemic, and businesses are struggling, especially in those industries, airlines and entertainment. So the regulator themselves are applying some sort of pragmatism, because really businesses have other fish to fry, so to speak.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I also wanted to talk about some of the trends in cybercrime against financial institutions, or just fraud in general, is a topic we don't often cover. Neira, could you tell us about some of the recent kind of fraud type of attacks that may be going on today?
Oh, absolutely. So if we put aside anything to do with cloud misconfiguration, which seems to be the new black, and keeps happening almost on a daily basis. What we have seen right now is a trend in the fraud and cybercrime linked to the pandemic. And basically, this is very much fraud, because what we're talking about is we're talking about identity theft, we're talking about impersonation, we're talking about phishing, and anything around the pandemic. And fraudsters are a very good social engineer, and people fall for it. So that is really the main trend currently. That, with obviously the increased sophistication we see in ransomware attacks, because criminals have also moved on with the time. If you recall, prior to 2018, prior to the GDPR, ransomware attack was a ransomware attack, which is essentially you encrypt and ask for some money and then you decrypt. Now the threat is more, if you don't give me the money, I'm actually going to release all of the data, and now you have a privacy problem to deal with.
Yeah, I've noticed that trend too. That's really interesting. I had not really tied it to GDPR, but it makes perfect sense, right? They're afraid of those fines for sure.
Absolutely.
My advice to folks on the, kind of phishing fraud front is, if it has to do with something that's very recent in the news, like a global pandemic, and they're asking for some type of financial transaction, just the answer is no, right? Especially if you're not expecting it.
Oh gosh, absolutely. And it's not just for phishing, because all too often what I find, organizations forget that information security is not just about the tech. It's about the people, it's about the processes, it's about the technology. So if, the people are not trained, if there are no appropriate governance processes around very good security technology that you may have deployed, then everything is in vain. So always people, process, and technology, and you will find generally when this type of thing happens, that's because of a lack of governance.
Yeah, and we also see scammers getting really a lot more creative, right? They get into an email account, and now they're emailing all of your friends going, hey, can you buy me some gift cards and send them to me? And I don't know if you've read some of the threads on that. They're actually kind of hilarious.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is really, really clever. So I actually commend the work of the Global Cyber Alliance, which is a not-for-profit organization, which I've been involved with for quite a while now. And essentially they started, my involvement started maybe 3 years ago, and the idea was they wanted to promote DMARC as a standard and everything around DNS security, and I had always been a fan of DMARC in terms of deploying a layered approach to email security, despite the fact that the standard had been around for some time. Not many people had heard of it, and they've done a tremendous job worldwide to raise awareness of the standard and protect organizations. But unfortunately, there should be more. There's not enough awareness of it. But phishing is actually one of the major causes of data breaches.
For sure. John, more questions for Neira?
Yeah, it never ends. So, a fun and unfortunate comment that a lot of us in security tend to make is, it's another security breach. My information's already out there. I don't really care. I say that with a little bit too much. You can probably hear it in my voice. It's been, published so many times. It's like, okay, great. What's your thoughts on that? I know for the average person out there probably doesn't realize how much their data is on the internet. Are we caring too much at this point? How do we sort of crawl back?
Do you mean from an individual point of view?
Both. Well, the individual can't crawl back. There's, it takes a lot of work, right? If you want to rebuild your privacy, but how as an industry, how do we, what tools do we provide? What guidance can we provide? Not just specifically for an individual, but for the population. Are there things a vendor can do to get better? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, in my opinion, it should always be getting back to basics and seeing exactly what your organization is about and the risks you face as a business. And there is no one size fits all for that. So it's knowing your business, knowing what you have, and the various risks that you may be facing. It is undeniable that certainly in Europe, the individuals themselves are more aware of privacy issues because of the GDPR, because it has been so well publicized. So now the man on the street, the man or the lady on the street is more aware of their rights in terms of their data. So there is the consumer behavior. People have come to expect security more than they did prior to May 2018. As far as businesses are concerned, it's a case of look at what you do and take a pragmatic approach, because all this is about is managing risk. And what I always say to people, there is absolutely no point in spending £100 or $100 on a £1 or $1 asset. It doesn't make any sense. It's not just about protecting anything. It's about protecting what matters and doing it well with making sure that your staff are aware and making sure that you have the appropriate governance processes in place to deal with whatever incident or crime may happen.
Yeah, I tend to have similar advice for organizations, especially when it comes to largely phishing that is against a financial, transaction, really of any organization, right? And I always tell people, and from what I've heard from people that have, anti-phishing technology to, anti-malware, whatever it is, the customers that prevent loss are the ones that have a process to validate the financial transactions. And Neira, I'm sure that's also probably part of your advice to your clients as well, right? Is that process is really, you're transferring $1 million. Someone should probably really scrutinize that before we just let it go.
Absolutely. And you'd think that would be common sense. And then you keep hearing about scams of somebody getting a so-called phone call from the CEO needing to do an urgent transaction.
Right.
I mean, it's just not right.
Yeah, I think it's process that really, in a lot of fraud prevention comes down to process, right?
Oh, gosh, absolutely. I mean, today in the news, there was an Irish bank that got fined by the regulator for having hidden a fraud that happened, I think, a couple of years ago. It was just on the news today. Oops. And essentially what happened was a high net worth individual, so this was premium banking, and for some reason credential got intercepted. I don't quite remember how it actually happened. The fraudsters called the bank and asked for a transfer to a particular account. Because it is a premium customer, I expect that was the reason behind this, to kind of provide the kind of premium service that you would expect. They actually transferred the money to another account without checking, without another means of checking. So of course the money went. When the actual customer realized, the bank immediately reimbursed the money, but actually hid it. So hid it from the regulators, and it only came to light very recently, and they got fined quite a substantial amount of money. I think it's 1.2 billion euros for a transfer that was, I think, 100,000 euros, and deservedly so. Because even if you're talking about premium banking and premium banking customers, yes, they do want a special service. They also expect proper governance.
Yeah, it's like fraud to cover up fraud. It's really bad. But now, and again, we don't cover fraud in great detail, but the companies and the technology that I've looked at to identify fraud seems to have an easier time, because transactions in the financial sector, right, are very well defined. So variations are a little easier to find than when we're talking about looking at web traffic or emails. Like, the data is so unstructured and so unpredictable that it's hard to prevent. But when we move to financial transactions, the fraud technology is very good today. Would you agree with that statement?
I would agree that there are very, very good technologies around which can be used very, very effectively if you deploy it for the purpose that they are supposed to be deployed with again the processes and the governance in place to actually use that. Because at the end of the day, those technologies throw a very, very vast amount of of data and what you want to be able to do from that. And we're talking, I'm sure you're referring to, for example, things like behavioral analytics and machine learning to be identified, to be able to identify anomalous patterns in quasi real time, then yes, that can be deployed and that can be indeed very, very effective. And you need to deploy it in the way that that is valuable to the organization, because at the end of the day, you don't want masses and masses of data and not being able to do anything with it because there's just too much.
And is that
what?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
Sorry, I was going to say.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Neira, and then John.
I was going to say it is undeniable that there is so much technology around that one needs to be extremely careful in deploying it. But because of the increase in moving towards digital, automation has become absolutely necessary, especially now with the surge in digital related to the pandemic.
Yeah.
So now it's time to buy stock in RegTech companies. Is what I'm trying to say.
A lot of us have the I'll call it a weakness of we're always trying to solve a problem with a tool, and that's not always the best way. And that sort of leads to where my question was going to be is, talking about specifically the data tools and the machine learning. For those in the ESW don't know, anytime I mention machine learning, I have to do my rainbow hands. But so, any of these type of technologies, they all cost money. And that's great for the larger enterprises. But what about, how does the mom and pop type, either a startup that's trying to bring out a new IoT device and they're caring about really tiny margins? I know that's not mom and pop, but you get the idea. How do we help them out? How do they approach mitigating these?
Let's go back to our favorite topic of PCI-DSS. So yes, we have the mom and pop shop, and suddenly everyone wants to try and see if, for example, they can convert a physical business into a digital one. A lot of that is happening right now and has been happening over the past 4 months or so. So what I would say is, if you're thinking of doing that, then do it the right way. Don't just ask for anyone to put together a website for you in their garage if they actually don't understand about taking payments. So if we look at the DSS, it has various scenarios in it. For an e-commerce website, for example, the simplest scenario would be for them to have a complete redirect model to a payment page. So that is easy to deploy. You can use companies that will help you do that. And it would provide, it is actually the minimal risk that you could potentially have. I'm not saying zero risk, but certainly the minimal risk. But if you don't know much about it and perhaps have someone else doing it for you, doing it in a way that is, for example, is going to you integrate directly into a payment page via an API because, well, that's what the person decided to do. That is obviously a very risky model because you don't get the cover of the third party that is actually compliant. So I would say take the advice, that the SSC is giving you if you're thinking about the website, and take the less risky option, which also happens to be the cheapest.
Yeah, no, and I think that's solid advice. I'm actually a big fan of Square, ironically enough, for that purpose. And in fact, when we've done transactions like that, we've actually used Square to give them a little, endorsement, right? But I'm assuming that's an example of what you were referring to, Neira, right?
Square or Stripe, use things that are known because they are large companies and they spend a lot of money in protecting their infrastructure and the ecosystem, and as a result, their customers.
Right. That's good advice.
What's interesting about those two examples actually is because, unfortunately, again, in the States here, people aren't going to spend money on security, but they will spend money on making their product easier to use so that it's easier to get money from the customers. And the great thing about Square and companies like that is they've made it very simple to either swipe the card, or it's another website using Square, I can easily pay them. So there's multiple ways into that.
Well, sorry, go ahead. Closing thoughts for our segment today. Very much enjoyed the conversation.
Sure. Well, I enjoyed it as well, and I would say be pragmatic and certainly look for advice from those that have done it before. Don't try to be too complicated. It does not necessarily need to cost a lot of money, and you can do it. And by doing that, not only do you protect yourself, you protect your own customers as well.
Neira, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly. John, thank you for filling in as a co-host for this segment.
Pleasure as always.
And that will conclude the show for today. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. We'll see you next time on Enterprise Security Weekly.